So I'm going to show you how you can walk into a gun store, not really know anything about guns per se, and what types of features you should look for in an AR, and what types of features that you can simply skip over. Because if you make a choice based on the wrong features, you might have something that looks awesome, but is just ridden with problems. Also, in order to make this video a little bit easier, I've also created a parts list for everything that we're going to be talking about in today's video. First link in the description. I'll also pin that link in the comments. And if you're watching this on your television, I will throw a QR code up right here. All you gotta do is pause the video and scan it. There are 3 key areas that I tend to focus on that are the most important 3 key areas when you're trying to determine if a particular brand is any good, or whether you're trying to determine if that gun is worth the money that the company is asking for it. And we're gonna go into detail on those 3 things, but before we do that, we need to define our purpose. So the purpose of your rifle, it could be anything from, I just want something that I can go to the range and have fun with. Another purpose would be, I want something for long range shooting. Maybe you just want it for home defense and self-defense. Maybe you want it for SHTF, meaning if all calamity breaks loose, you want a rifle that is just gonna survive no matter what. Those are all things that you need to take into consideration. But for the example purposes of today's video, most people's first AR-15 is gonna be some kind of general purpose or do-all type AR-15. And all that simply means is it's an AR-15 that can do a lot of things pretty well, but it's a master of none of them. A good example of that would be something like this. This is a basic AR-15. I've upgraded some of the parts over the years, but overall, you can still do home defense with it. You can still go to the range and have fun with it. And if you use the right ammo and you choose the right barrel, you can actually do some long range shooting with it. And I typically always recommend a dual purpose or general purpose gun to the first time owners because these are the best types of guns that help you hone in and figure out things that you like about it, things that you don't like about it. And that way, in the future, you can either A, upgrade the one you have, or you can simply apply those features to a new build or a new platform that you want to invest in. Now, once you've determined your purpose of a general purpose rifle, you need to ask yourself, and you need to be very honest with yourself, how many rounds per month do you plan on shooting? The reason that that's important is if you're planning on actually training with your gun and actually going out and being proficient with it, you're gonna need a different level of a gun versus something you're just gonna go play with at the range and just barely put any rounds through it. Now, one of the more important things we need to define is what is our budget. Now, when it comes to determining your budget, there are 2 ways you can kind of look at this, and both sides kind of argue with each other on who's right and who's wrong. You can choose either A, get something cheap like this, figure out what you like, what you don't like, upgrade it over time. Then there's people who say you should buy once, cry once. As an example, this gun right here, as it sits with the optics and the mount and the light, is a little over $4,000. This one here is $700, maybe $800 with the trigger in it. I bought it during Obama's administration, so prices were crazy back then. The biggest pro of getting something cheap, if you make the wrong decision, it's not an expensive lesson to learn. You can simply swap out parts, upgrade it over time. The other pro, maybe you need something relatively quickly. Maybe you have a stalker and you don't have time to save up the money to go get something nice, but you need something that's effective and will work for you. Getting something cheap is a very viable option, especially if time is of the essence. At the same time though, there are cons to getting something cheap. Number 1, lower quality. And what we mean by lower quality, most of the time is gonna be lower quality control. How many of these uppers are they inspecting that go out the door? If a company inspects every single part, the price goes up. If they do it in batches where they only inspect 1 in 10 or 1 in 50, the price goes down. Just understand that just because it's cheap doesn't mean it's lower quality, but on the same token, just because it's expensive doesn't mean it's high quality. And we'll cover more about that here in a second. So what are the pros of getting something more expensive? Well, the first pro, it should typically have higher QC going on with it. The second pro is they typically have a better warranty than some of the cheap stuff. Some of the cheap stuff might have, a 1-year warranty. I don't really know. Every brand is different. But when you get up into the upper echelons of the price range, typically the companies have a lifetime warranty or a 10-year warranty. something like that. Now, the biggest cons of getting something expensive is obviously the cost. It can be an expensive lesson to learn, especially if you're someone new, you don't really know what you're doing, and you buy the wrong gun for your purposes. Now you're out all this money and it doesn't fit what you need it to do. Not only that, but sometimes with some of these more expensive rifles, they might not even come with a good trigger. They might not even come with good controls or a good charging handle. There are many $3,000, $4,000 ARs that still just have basic triggers, basic controls. And the companies are only charging those prices because they have government contracts and they can leverage that to inflate the prices. And as I mentioned earlier, expensive doesn't always mean quality. Sometimes the expensive guns can fail faster than their cheaper alternatives. Now, what do I mean by fail? Now, the AR platform, DI gas AR-15, the point that is supposed to fail on it is the gas tube. So if this gun's gonna fail at any point, that gas tube's supposed to blow out to save the barrel. If you guys have paid attention to the Golden Web YouTube channel, he's been doing a ton of full auto burn downs with different guns and different uppers. They did a test with a Knights Armament AR-15. Knights Armament is one of the creme de la creme, unobtainium type guns that everybody wants, but nobody can afford, and even if you can afford it, they're almost impossible to find. They did a full auto test on that gun. It failed within 574 rounds, but it didn't fail the way that AR-15s are supposed to fail with the gas tube bursting. It blew the side of the barrel out. Why is that important? Well, they did another test with a different gun from a company called Bear Creek Arsenal. If you know anything about Bear Creek Arsenal, they are not known for quality. In fact, most people say to stay away from them. Their gun went 625 rounds, but it didn't fail. The reason that they had to stop the test was it was using a plastic handguard, and the handguard caught on fire, and they had to stop the test due to safety reasons. So you're telling me that this $200 Bear Creek Arsenal upper outperformed this multi-$1,000 Knights Armament upper. Crazy, right? Now that we moved off that tangent, when it comes to budget in the year 2024, I kind of have different price ranges that I consider to be different tiers. So anything $1,000 and below, I consider to be lower end AR-15s. Not saying they're bad, just saying in terms of pricing. For mid-tier is anywhere from $1,000 to $2,000, and then anything that's beyond $2,000, I consider to be higher tier. Now within those, sometimes you can find a gun that is less than $1,000 that has most of the features from the mid-tier. And those are guns that I call giant killers. And we'll go into some of those here in a little bit. Those are always good buys. Something else we need to consider when we're trying to establish our budget is there's more to buying a gun than just the price of the gun. For example, if you're gonna run a sling, you need to factor that in. You're gonna need to factor in multiple magazines. Maybe you wanna get a hand stop to put on it. Maybe you wanna put a light on it. Then there's also your sighting system. Most rifles aren't gonna come with sights. Some will come with irons, some don't. But then you're probably gonna wanna do a red dot or a scope, and these can vary greatly in price. Another thing you need to answer is, are you left-handed or right-handed? If you're a left-handed shooter, you're probably gonna wanna get a gun that is designed for a lefty, or you're gonna wanna get something that's ambidextrous. The downside with ambi guns is they typically cost a lot more than non-ambi guns. And we'll go over some examples here in a little bit. Now, the next question comes down to, should you buy it? Should you build one from scratch? Or should you piece one together? Building it from scratch, obviously, that's exactly what it sounds like. You buy all the pieces separately, you assemble them together, do your safety checks on the gun, make sure that your head spacing and stuff like that is intact, then you go out and shoot it. The pros about building something like that is you get every single part that you absolutely want on the gun, and you don't have a bunch of spare parts laying around. I personally built my first AR because I wanted to understand all the inside and out of how it worked. That way, if I had problems, I would be able to fix it. Now, I did create a course a few years ago on how to build start to finish, how to install all the parts and all that stuff. I had to put it on a course because unfortunately, can't put it on YouTube anymore. And then I used to upload it to other platforms that were free, and then I would link to them from my YouTube videos. Unfortunately, YouTube started giving me strikes on my videos because I linked to those videos. And so the only way around it, when I spoke with the people at YouTube, was to create something that had a paywall. I'm not saying you have to go out and buy my course. I'm just saying it's there if you want it. I created it just so I have a place to always put tutorials. I got tons of other stuff on there, not just ARs, but I'll have a link in the description if you want to check that out. Piecing one together, you could buy a complete lower and a complete upper. Or you could buy a complete lower and then you could buy an upper that doesn't have a bolt carrier group or charging handle, then go buy your own and piece those together. And the reason you would want to either build it from scratch or piece it together is sometimes a factory gun doesn't have all the features you want, but if you piece them together, you can get all the features you want. Which brings me to my next point. Earlier I was talking about there's 3 key areas that I look at when I'm looking into buying an AR-15, and these 3 areas are the most vital parts of the gun. Thankfully, all of those vital parts are in the upper receiver. Now, before we get to those 3 parts, I do want to give a big shout out to Brownells. And I wanted to bring them up because in light of today's video, we just did a build with the BRN 180 upper and this chassis here that converts it into a bullpup. I will have a full video coming out on this in the very near future, but if you're interested in checking these out, I will have some more info at the parts list about them. So the first key area that we want to look at is the barrel. As I was talking about earlier with that channel that does all the full auto test, one of the things that seemed to be a common occurrence on their channel, with the exception of 2 guns, was the guns didn't fail as they were supposed to, meaning they had catastrophic failures and the barrels exploded. And this is one of the reasons why barrel choice is very important. So the first thing you want to think about with your barrel is the length of it. Now, we've determined that barrel length for a dual purpose, for our purposes today, is going to be about 16 inches. That way, we don't got to worry about any legalities of a short barrel rifle. You could get like a 13.9 inch or a 14.5 inch, like this one here, and then you could have a muzzle device which is pinned and welded onto it. I don't recommend these for first-time AR buyers because you might want to test out different muzzle devices and figure out which ones work best for you. And when you do a pin weld, you're not going to be able to test out different muzzle devices to see which ones you like. When it comes to longer ranges, a lot of people want to go with an 18 or even a 20-inch barrel. And some people even argue the fact that you can't shoot long range with a short barrel. Well, typically that's good advice, but I have a 13.9 inch here, and I was hitting steel with this at 950 yards using some really good ammunition.
1.8.
Oh, hit with a 13.9.
2.8.
That's a solid fucking 15-mile-an-hour wind right there. Oh, 15.9 on a tripod.
Are you filming?
Hammered at 950.
So that's a little bit about barrel length, but there's also how the barrel is made. Typically for AR-15, you have button rifled and you have cold hammer forged. Cold hammer forged is typically going to be more expensive because the machines that make them are very, very expensive. I go into a lot of detail about barrel selection on AR-15s. If you want to watch that video, it's about an hour long. I'll put a link either right here or I'll put that link in the description for you so you can watch it. But here's kind of the gist of it. You can choose cold hammer forged, or you can get something that's button rifled that's a 4150 chromoly vanadium, or you can get a 416R stainless steel. On average, cold hammer forged is going to be the longest lasting. It's going to hold up better to heat resistant, especially under full auto fire. However, typically it's going to have less accuracy than the other 2. Now, in today's day and age, with the way technology has been going, there are companies that are making cold hammer forged barrels that have the same accuracy as some of the 4150 or even the 416Rs, but just as an average, they're typically less accurate, but they're more durable. Cold hammer forged rifles are known for lasting 25,000 rounds, if not more, but it really depends on if you're shooting full auto, how rapidly you're shooting, how many heat cycles you're putting the barrel through. So those aren't set in stone numbers. Those are just averages. Moving on down, we have the 4150 chromoly vanadium barrels. They are button rifled, and typically these are going to be your best all-around barrels. This is a barrel that I typically recommend, especially to first-time gun buyers, because they have decent accuracy as well as good heat resistance. They typically have a life of anywhere from about 8,000 to 15,000 rounds, and that's also going to depend on how you shoot it, how you heat cycle it, and things like that. Then you have your 416R stainless steel. That is what's on the Blackout Defense that I have right here. Now, this is a proprietary type technology that's in this one, but on average, 416R are going to be for your sub-MOA accuracy groups. Now, although the 416R are the most accurate, they do have the lowest life. Typically with these, they'll go about 5,000-ish rounds on average of sub-MOA accuracy. Then after about that 5,000 to 6,000 rounds, depending on the company that makes it, like this one lasts longer because it's proprietary technology, but after about the 5,000 round mark, the groups on your paper start to open up drastically. And it'll probably sit at about 3 or 4 MOA for a few thousand rounds, and then the barrel's toast. But for the purposes of today's video, for a dual-purpose first rifle, I definitely recommend either Cold Hammer Forge or the 4150 Chromoly Vanadium. Now we get down to the twist rates. Again, this is one of those topics we can make an hour-long video just talking about twist rates. And the things that I'm going to say here are highly debated. So what is a twist rate? So a twist rate, you're typically going to see it as a fraction. 1/7, 1/8, 1/9. Those are the 3 most common twist rates with AR-15s. All that simply means is if we took 1/7 twist rate, it means for every 7 inches of barrel travel, the bullet completes 1 full rotation. Or if we had a 1/8 twist rate and we had a 16-inch barrel, that means by the time the bullet exits the barrel, it has already made 2 complete full rotations. On average, if you're gonna shoot heavier grain bullets, like 65 grain, 75 grain, 77 grain, they'll be better suited for something like a 1/7 or a 1/8 twist rate. Whereas if you're gonna shoot something like a 55 grain, they can be better suited for 1/9 twist rates. This really isn't the most important thing ever, especially for a first-time gun buyer. This is going to be something that you really pay attention to when you want to get into real sub-MOA accuracy type stuff. But it's just something to keep in mind. When I bought my first gun, I simply went with the one in the middle. I went with a 1/8 twist rate. But honestly, you can't really go wrong with any of them. You can shoot any of the grain bullets through them. It's just some grains are going to be more accurate through one twist rate versus the other. So let's talk about quality control. So with a lot of barrels, you want to know whether or not it's been magnetic particle inspected or high pressure tested. This is another one of those things that people highly debate about whether it's necessary or not. Just understand, high pressure testing and magnetic particle inspection is just another level of QC. That means when that barrel left that manufacturer, it was passing the test. It doesn't guarantee longevity. It doesn't guarantee anything except when it left their factory, it was good to go and it didn't arrive to you with any defects. So typically I prefer a barrel that at least has high pressure testing and magnetic particle inspecting just to be on the safe side. The next part of the barrel we need to think about is the chambering. The 3 most common types of chamberings for an AR-15, especially when we're talking about 223, 5.56 type stuff, is going to be 5.56 NATO, 223 Wild, and 223 Remington. All you really need to know, with a 223 Remington, it is not recommended to shoot 5.56 rounds through it. Has something to do with the chambers not being supported for 5.56 or something like that. I'm not going to go into the weeds on it. But with 5.56 NATO and 223 Wild, you can shoot either 223 or 5.56 through either of those chambers. The military tends to use 5.56 NATO, but lately in the civilian world, 223 Wild seems to be one of the best choices. The next very important part that I want to look at on the rifle is going to be what bolt carrier group does it have. And this is probably going to be the most important aspect of the rifle because this is going to be the most likely part to fail in any AR-15 because it's the part that's getting the most stress, the most wear, and the most tear on it. And just for clarification, throughout the past 8 or 9 years that I've been here on YouTube, I've never had a bolt fail on me. I've had cheap bolts, I've had expensive bolts, I've had mid-range bolts. The only time I've had any type of malfunction due to a bolt had to do with lack of cleaning. So they are important to keep them clean, especially along the bolt face and the chambering of the rifle. The best practices, I say, when you're looking at a bolt carrier group is you want to look at the brand reputation. Just because it's a higher end brand and it has an expensive price doesn't mean the bolt carrier group is going to be good. You want to look at some other factors on it. Now, similar to the barrels, the bolt carrier group can also be either high pressure tested or magnetic particle inspected. Some bolts might be magnetic particle inspected only, but some are also high pressure tested and magnetic particle inspected. Now, this is another place where people argue about if it's necessary or not. For me, on a first gun, I want something that's at least magnetic particle inspected, but I really try to find something that's both. Now with the carriers, there is full auto profile and semi-auto profile. Most AR-15s that I've seen always come with a full auto profile bolt, but it is something you might want to check just in case. It doesn't mean that your gun's full auto or anything like that. It just means that the carrier has a little bit more mass to it. You can tell the difference between the two by looking at the cut on the underside of the carrier. The semi-auto is cut back a little bit further than the full auto. Not the biggest deal if you don't get one, but sometimes they can be a little bit less reliable when you're starting to play with buffer springs and stuff like that over time. Another common failure point on bolt carriers is going to be the ejector and the extractor. Some bolt carriers have better springs in the others. If your AR-15 is getting a lot of malfunctions, this could be an area to look at. Sometimes just upgrading the extractor and the extractor spring is enough to make it more reliable. I went into more detail about this in another video. So if you want to check out that video, I'll put a link up here or either down in the description. But just understand that most of your lower end guns, they might have a good extractor, they might have a good extractor spring, they might not. But fortunately, they're fairly easy to upgrade over time. One place though that is very important to look is at the gas key. You want to make sure that that gas key is properly staked. If you use a torque wrench that measures inch-pounds, it can go forward and reverse. You can actually set that. I think it's about 15 or 20 inch-pounds. I'll annotate it on the screen. But you could simply take that torque wrench and do a reverse torque test to see if your bolts will loosen or not. If they are properly staked, they won't move. If they aren't, they're gonna start backing out. In that case, you can either take it to a gunsmith and get it fixed, or I'll have some more info at the parts list about this, but there is a jig you can get that will stake your gas key for you. Whenever you're talking about the bolt portion of a bolt carrier group, there's typically two types of steels that are used. There's Carpenter 158 steel and there's 9310 steel. Whenever I'm buying a higher end bolt carrier group, like something from Geisley or Bravo Company or some other higher end brands, I prefer to go with Carpenter 158. They need to be carefully magnetic particle inspected and carefully high pressure tested, and they also got to be very careful on the heat treating process. If those controls aren't in place, Carpenter 158 will fail. Then we got to look at coatings. And this is another area that can cause a bolt carrier group to fail. The most common two coatings to cause a bolt carrier group to fail are going to be titanium nitride, which is the gold color, and nickel boron, which looks like chrome. The reason that these two coatings can cause bolts to fail is because when you lay down that coating, it tends to build up. And so what they have to do is they kind of have to make the bolt carrier group a little bit undersized and then add it on top. And then there's a lot of stuff that goes on with that. But typically, if people are going to have issues that's due to coating or undersizing and stuff like that, it's going to be due to those two types of coating. With that said, I have a ton of nickel boron bolt carrier groups. I've never had any issues with any of them. I just say this, if you're going to get nickel boron, make sure you get it from a reputable manufacturer, not someone that's cheap, and same thing for titanium nitride. However, with that said, the most reliable coatings are going to be Parkerized. Those are the black ones that just kind of look like this dirty, dull, dry color. And then you have chrome. Some of my favorite brands that make bolt carrier groups are going to be Bravo Company, Geisley, Microbest, Toolcraft, Sons of Liberty Gunworks. I have a whole list. I'll have it over at the parts list so you can check it out for yourself. Now, the third area of an AR-15 that I think is important to look at is going to be the handguard. And when I'm looking at handguards, I'm looking at three critical components of it. The first component is going to be the attachment method. This is going to be how the handguard secures itself onto the barrel nut. On cheaper handguards, you'll see a couple of tiny bolts that go from one side to the other side, and they clamp onto the barrel nut. Now, on a cheaper version, you'll see that those little bolts go through and they're threading directly into the handguard itself. Something to keep in mind is the handguard is actually made out of aluminum. The bolts are made out of steel. And the problem with that is steel can strip out the aluminum very easily. These typically have lower torque specs than the other ones that we're going to talk about. So these torque specs will be measured in inch-pounds. But even so, they can tend to strip off. And because you can't torque them down enough, the handguard can be prone to slippage and movement. So instead of going for something that is threading right into the handguard, I tend to go for something that has steel inserts on the other side that they're threading into. This allows you to have higher torque specs, which will prevent slippage and movement of the handguard. Third area that I look at on any handguard is the handguard needs to have some type of anti-rotation measures on it. And that is to prevent the handguard from moving left or right. Reason these things are important is, let's say you wanted to run a laser or an IR laser on your handguard. You got to zero that laser. If your handguard moves at all, you just threw off your entire laser. Additionally, you'll see sometimes people will bridge the gap between their handguard and their receiver with, say, like an optics mount. That's not recommended, but in some cases it's unavoidable. And if that handguard moves at all, you're going to ruin your zero. Now, whenever you're looking at handguards, there's a bunch of different types. The one here from Geisley, for example, is using these two bolts right here, and these are measured in foot-pounds. You can see on this side they have the steel inserts, and these bolts are very robust. I forget the exact torque specs on there, but I believe it's around 10 or 11 foot-pounds. The same thing applies to Blackout Defense. They have these huge bolts that go in here, and then they have the steel inserts on this side, and then these actually bite into the barrel nut itself in addition to that to prevent slippage. Now, when it comes to anti-rotation, there are different methods. For example, with the Blackout Defense, they use two steel dowels that go between the handguard and the upper receiver. You can't see them because they're hidden. So if you were to look at this from the outside, you would think it doesn't have anti-rotation, but in fact it does. The way that Geissele does anti-rotation, at least when you're using their upper receivers, is they're gonna use it looks like a puzzle piece that goes from the handguard into the upper receiver, and that is very sturdy, and it works really well. Some companies like Radian here are gonna use these vertical bolts right here. They use a very complex type system. The same thing with Daniel Defense. They use a very complex system of bolts to prevent movement of the handguard. Now, one of the most affordable ways to do anti-rotation is some companies like this one from Stag Arms, I'll show it to you up close, they use these little extensions on the side of the handguard that lock around the receiver to prevent it from movement. These do work very well. The downside to something like this, though, it does allow a little bit of wobble. So it can still move a little bit, but not as much if you didn't have anything. The next area I look at a handguard, and this isn't a deal breaker, but it is something that if the handguard has it, I consider it to be a little bonus. Some handguards will have a QD slot right here. Now on this particular one, this is from Aero Precision, you'll notice that this is just a standard hole on an aluminum handguard. The downside to something like that is when you use these little push buttons right here, these are made of steel. And you don't want to put a steel QD socket into an aluminum handguard because it will simply rip out and mess up the metal. And so usually what you have to do is something like this. You have to go pick up these things, and they're just like steel reinforcements that go over that hole, and that will prevent you from screwing up your handguards. However, there are some companies that include steel reinforcements in their QD slots from the factory. This is typically seen in higher end brands. This one is from a company called X2 Development Group. I don't have my complete review finished on this, but that will be coming in the very near future. But this one uses a lot of crazy technology besides that steel insert here. Look at this junction between the upper and the lower. That is their anti-rotation method. It is crazy. Another company that leverages steel inserts for their QD sockets is going to be Geissele. Now, not all Geissele handguards are going to have the QD sockets, but a lot of them will. Also, there are affordable companies that are making them now, like Palmetto State Armory, which we'll cover in a little more detail when we get to our top 5 rifles. Those are the most important things that I look at, with the QD socket being the least important. However, you want to also look at something called the attachment method. As of right now, there's basically 3 different types of attachment methods. The most popular being M-LOK, similar to this one. There's also some with just pick rail all around it, also known as a quad rail. There's also some that are hybrids. I prefer M-LOK, but I prefer that a gun have M-LOK at the top corners, on the sides, on the corners down here, and on the bottom. And I prefer that I have a complete Picatinny rail along the top. Some handguards will only have M-LOK along the sides and on the bottom. And then at the corners here, those are just lightning cuts. You'll also notice with this particular handguard, they removed all the pick section from the top of the rail. They just have a little bit out front over here so that you can mount your front sight. Then they have a little bit back here towards the receiver, so if you need to bridge that gap, you can. But the one benefit to having these types of handguards is they're much more comfortable to grip. Another type of handguard that you will see is something called a hybrid rail. This is an example of it. So we have M-LOK all around it, but then out here towards the end, we have integrated Picatinny slots on the bottom side here and on each side. That could be popular for some people. Just keep in mind, it will add a little bit of unnecessary weight at the end of your gun. But as I was talking about earlier, I prefer a rail that has M-LOK all around and a little bit on these corners. Now up here, these are lightning cuts on this one, but out here on the end, we do have a few QD slots. And I like them out there because if you want a mount to light on here, if you only have it on the sides, you're gonna be a little bit limited on where you can mount lights. So just some things to consider. So for a first gun of an AR-15, as I mentioned earlier, I prefer a 16-inch barrel. So when I look for handguards, I'm looking for a 15-inch handguard. I like for my handguard to cover the majority of the barrel. I want it to have sturdy fasteners so that it locks up onto the barrel nut really good, and it needs to have some kind of version of anti-rotation. I'm not really worried about which type, just want to make sure that it's not going to spin off, and just in case. And if possible, I try to find a handguard that has reinforced QD sockets on it. I'll have links over at the parts list of different ones that I prefer, just in case you're interested. Now, when it comes down to the trigger, all of the furniture like the stocks and the grips, the safety selectors and the magazine releases and bolt releases, as well as muzzle devices that can come on guns, when I'm looking for an AR-15, those aren't my primary concerns. Now, those are very nice to have features if they're upgraded, but one of the reasons it's not a primary concern is there's a lot of crappy rifles out there that fail the first three that we talked about with the barrel, the bolt carrier group, and the handguard, and they'll have like amazing furniture on them. They'll have ambi controls, 4590 safeties, and upgraded triggers. But if those first three aspects of the gun aren't up to snuff, then you'll have something that looks awesome that doesn't perform good. But if I can find a gun within my price range that passed those first couple of tests, and then if it also has all the cool furniture and the upgraded triggers, then those are just added bonuses for me. So what are my top 5 favorite AR-15s? And just a spoiler alert, we're probably gonna go over 5. Now, the first AR-15 that I recommend to people, and it's one that I actually don't even own yet, but I have plenty of trigger time behind it, is the IWI Zion. These can be picked up for like $700 to $800, depending on where you find them. I'll have links at the parts list for you if you wanna check them out. But they have a really good M-LOK handguard on them. They have decent bolts on them with anti-rotation. The downside is the torque specs on them is 45 inch-pounds instead of going up to foot-pounds. They do use a 4150 chromoly vanadium barrel. I can't find much info about their specs on their bolt carrier group, but from a lot of people's testing, as well as my own trigger time behind them, I've never had any issues with it. They come with some upgraded furniture like B5 systems. They have mil-spec triggers, mil-spec safeties and controls and stuff like that, but they tend to be super reliable and very affordable. And for about 800 to 850 bucks, it's hard to go wrong with them. Good thing about them is because they're so affordable, if you wanted to upgrade the bolt or upgrade something else in it, it's super easy to do. Now, the next affordable gun that I really love is the PSA Saber line. Now, this gun isn't the particular one that I actually recommend. This is their billet line. I prefer their forged line. And I've done a complete video breakdown of this. And if you're curious about knowing more about the Saber, I'll put a link right here because there's a lot of ins and outs to know about these. However, what you need to know is they have 2 handguards in particular that I like. They have one that's a PSA handguard that has reinforced QD mounts on it. Then they have one that comes with a Geisley handguard. The one that comes with the Geisley handguard actually has a cold hammer forged barrel from FN. And within that, they also have a cross-drilled gas block on it. They all come with a MicroBest bolt carrier group. Now, the good thing about the MicroBest bolt carrier groups is they are magnetic particle inspected and some of them are high pressure tested. You just kind of have to look through the different variants to see which one you're getting. They also have upgraded springs in the extractors and stuff like that, so they tend to be really reliable. Unlike the IWI Zion, they do come with an upgraded mil-spec plus trigger that pulls at a crisp, clean 4 pounds. So it's definitely better than mil-spec. On the controls of the gun, they actually come with a Radian ambidextrous charging handle. This is one of my favorite charging handles of all time. They also come with the Radian ambidextrous 4590 safety, so you can select it to be 45 degrees or 90, whatever you prefer. They have some that have B5 systems furniture on them. They have some that have Magpul. There's a ton of different options. Additionally, they also have them with different types of muzzle devices. So if you want one that has a QD on it, you can get one with the QD. If you want one that is pin welded, they also offer those. I've been shooting the crap out of this one, a little over 1,000 rounds, 0 problems out of it. This one I have a few bones to pick about in particular, which I covered in that video. However, I would get their forged line. It seems to be the most reliable, has the best barrel, all that other stuff. The best part about these, if you get the one with the PSA handguard, they're less than 1,000 bucks. If you get the one with the cold hammer forged FN barrel and the Geisley handguard and the cross drilled gas block, those tend to be about 1,200, but still, for that price point, there is no other companies that are even coming close to that with that many features in the gun. Another gun that I typically recommend to people is one that I also don't have yet, but I have some trigger time behind, is the Diamondback DB15s. These also have a good, clean M-LOK handguard. The downside though is they don't have reinforced quick detach. Not the biggest deal in the world on that, but it's just something to note. They come with 4150 chromoly vanadium barrels. When you compare the DB15 to say something like the IWI Zion, like I said, I couldn't find much info about the specs of the bolt carrier group on the IWI Zion, but on the DB15, they are shot peen bolt carrier groups, are magnetic particle inspected, and they are mil spec. It seems that you get a little bit of a better bolt carrier group with the Diamondback DB15. They come with basic controls, basic trigger, mag pull furniture, and a lot of people have said that they love them and they're really good for the price. I've had a little bit of trigger time behind it. I'm waiting for one to arrive. Same thing with the IWI Zion, so we can actually do testing on it. But from all of my friends testing that I trust, they love them and they work great. Best part about them is that so far they are one of the more affordable rifles on this list. They only come in at about 750 bucks. Now, let's say that the $750 mark is a little bit too expensive for your blood. Another one that I recommend, because this was the first one that I ever put together, is something from Radical Firearms. Now, this one I've upgraded the handguard over time. I've upgraded the trigger and the charging handle, but everything else on here is completely the same. Essentially, what I did was I bought a Radical Firearms upper and I paired it with an Anderson lower and built it out. Radical Firearms can be had for $399. It is crazy. And the good news about that is that can allow someone to kind of get into the game, learning about AR-15s and testing them and seeing what they like. And then you could upgrade it slowly over time. So they're cheap enough that if you spent the money on them and something went wrong and you had to upgrade, say, a bolt carrier group, you're not really out a lot of money. But their quality seems to be up to par enough so that you're not gonna get a gun that has a catastrophic failure. I can't say that it won't, but I'm just saying in the years that I've had mine, I think I have a little over 6,000 rounds through this one. I've had no issues with it. Now, let's just say, for example, I'm looking to get my first AR-15 and I'm very serious about getting into this game and I wanna get the best I can get and I have a higher budget than other people. What would I get in those scenarios? Well, one of the first ones that I recommend is the Geissele Super Duties. I've had this thing for a couple of years. This thing has so much going on with it, and for the price point, these are around 2,000 bucks or something like that, but you get a lot for the money. And like I said, I go into a lot more detail about it in the dedicated video that you can watch. But they come with upgraded triggers, they come with B5 systems, they have that crazy bolt, they got an insane handguard, cold hammer forged barrels. This was one of the ones that performed the best in the full auto meltdown from the Golden Web channel. These went over 900 rounds. Now, the next one that I would recommend that is higher end is this one from Blackout Defense. I have a complete video for this one that goes into it because this one has a lot of space age technology that goes into this. The barrel system is insane. And as I mentioned earlier, I was hitting at 950 yards on this with a 13.9 inch barrel with a 15-mile-an-hour crosswind with hardly any problems. The only thing that was hard about it was calling the wind because it kept shifting. Now, if the Geissele and the Blackout Defense are way too expensive for your blood, then this I think will be a perfect middle ground. This is the Bravo Company Recce 14. They also make it in a 16-inch barrel. This is probably one of the best mid-tier rifles that you can pick up right now. I think a complete one is about $1,400-1,500 or so, depending on where you get it. If you have any types of promos going on, I'll have info over at the parts list about it. Even if the $1,400 to $1,500 is too much for you, honestly, most of the magic in their guns is in their uppers, and their uppers are about $700 to $800. You can get your own lower and do all that stuff if you choose to do so, and you can get out a little bit cheaper that way. The thing I love about Bravo Company is they do 100% quality control checks on their bolt carrier groups. This one, although this bolt carrier group looks brown, this one is a Parkerized. They are high pressure tested, magnetic particle inspected, they're shot peened. But it's not just that, it's everything that Bravo Company does. They simply take the utmost care in their QC. You can either get 4150 chromoly vanadium barrels, or you can even choose to get cold hammer forged barrels. I love their grips, I love their stocks, I love their foregrips. The biggest downside is you're still gonna get a mil-spec trigger. This is not the factory trigger. You're gonna get a mil-spec safety. That's not the safety that came with it. And they did recently come out with ambidextrous charging handles. This is not one of them. I did order one so I can test it. and you can get them in either flat dark earth or black. I have full videos dedicated to this. I'll make sure to link those down in the description so you can check them out. Now, for guns that I recommend for a left-handed shooter, you're gonna need something that's either dedicated for a lefty or something that is fully ambi. A couple of good ones that I've tried and I've heard of. This is the LWR-CI. I do not have a complete video on it. I am still doing my testing on it. I'm sorry it's taken so long. But if you do enough searching around, you can pick these things up for a fairly good price, about $1,500 for this one, but they can go up to about $2,000 depending on where you get them. These, I'm not gonna go into all the detail about it because we will get to that in the future video. However, these are completely fully ambidextrous. If you are left-handed shooter, you can get a mag release over here. You can also do your bolt release and bolt lock on this side as well as this side. Also, if you're right-handed, you can manipulate this thing one-handed. So if you go to do a mag change and then you wanna drive the bolt home, you can simply press that button and it goes into battery. This is one of the most affordable, fully ambi complete rifles that you can get if you search for the right prices. Another fully ambi gun that you can get is from Primary Weapon Systems, or if you don't actually want to get the full gun, you can actually get a complete lower from them that is completely ambi, and it comes with a bunch of high-end like parts in the lower receiver. Those are about $600, and I might have some special ways that allow you not to pay full price for them, but that'll be over there if you want to do a comparing and contrast. But if you want a gun that is dedicated completely for a left-handed shooter, this isn't one of them because I'm not left-handed, but Stag Arms actually makes fully left-handed guns where the ejection port is on the left side. It's just a mirror image of a regular AR-15. And this is a Stag Arms Spectrum. I don't have my full video out ready for this one yet, but that is coming. But this thing has been very impressive, especially for the money. Just give you a little teaser for that video. Probably one of my favorite fully ambi guns is the Radian ADAC. This one's a little bit different than others, but you don't have to go spend the $3 grand on the full gun. You can actually get a stripped lower receiver that is completely ambidextrous. Let's say I had a malfunction right here. All you gotta do is pull the charging handle while you press the mag release button, and it locks the bolt open. And press the button here, and it goes home. It also works the exact same way on this side. You just press the button, pull the bolt, and it will lock open, and then you can also press the bolt on the left side and make it go home. If you were to pick up a stripped lower of the Radian ADAC, it actually isn't completely stripped. They do come with Radian's 4590 ambidextrous safety selector. It comes with all the magazine releases because of that ambidextrous system, and they come with Radian's takedown pin. So all you really need for that to run is a grip and the springs, a buffer tube, and a trigger. It's like a halfway stripped lower receiver. And those are about 500-ish bucks, depending on where you get them, but I also have some ways not to pay full price for them. I'll have that available over at the parts list. Let's talk about piecing them together, because this seems to be a really good route for people to go, especially if you're new to this and you want to get as many features as you possibly can for a lower price point. Let's just pretend I was going to piece together my favorite, what I would consider to be one of the best bang for the buck, under $1,000. Here's how I would do it. I would go to PSA's, I'd get one of their complete lowers for the Saber line that comes with the B5 Systems furniture. It also comes with that Hyperfire EDT trigger that has a 4-pound pull. Those are only about 260 to 270 bucks, depending on which variant you get. And then if I was on a super big budget, I would go get the upper that has the 4150 chromoly vanadium barrel with the PSA Saberline M-Lock handguard that has the reinforced QD slots. And you could just get away with that for like 800-ish, and you're gonna have a gun that not only has a good barrel, a good bolt carrier group, and a good handguard, you're also gonna get the Radian 4590 safety, the Radian charging handle, and all those extra little goodies that aren't really the biggest factor when factoring in a gun, and you can get away with it for close to 800-ish. If you wanna spend a little extra money and get a cold hammer forged barrel, you can do that. Or if you wanna spend even a little bit more than that and get a Geisley handguard with a cold hammer forged barrel, you can do that as well. As of right now, that is my top pick for a budget-friendly first-time AR-15. It just works, and it comes with all of the extra features that you might want in a gun. Some people think that PSA is a dirt crap. I look at PSA similar to the way I look at Hyundai and Kia. Yeah, in the early days, they were throwaway cars, Hyundai and Kia. Same thing with PSA. But over the years, they've invested in buying up companies that have good QC, and their Saber line, at least in my experience, seems to be rock solid, but there's other companies as well that I've mentioned in this video. The most important thing to understand is not to overanalyze it. And getting into this world of AR-15s is all about learning, and learning not just about what's good quality and what's not, but also learning about what are your preferences, the types of parts that you want to put on your AR-15. Now, this is not a complete exhaustive list of all the guns I recommend. I like a lot of them. If you want to see more of a breakdown and comparison of different higher end guns like Daniel Defense and stuff like that, I highly recommend that you go check out this video right here, because you might be surprised on how some of these higher end companies cut a lot of corners. But let me know your thoughts down in the comments section. But until next time, guys, I love you. You guys stay sexy.